Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our continuing saga about Esther. And we're getting into the really exciting part now. And I want you to watch in the next chapter or two. What I see is God working behind the scenes. And you can see all these little kind of like strings all being put together. And then eventually a marvelous tapestry is going to emerge. God working behind the scenes. And that's kind of why, in some ways, the story itself, as they're telling it in the Bible, kind of it seems to zip around. It mentions a person and then doesn't tell us any more about that person until later. So that's just getting all the characters in line for us, so that we know who's who and recognize that there's all these things going on. The other thing that I noticed, and I wanted to point this out, is I was reading other translations of this story, other biblical translations. I realized that King Xerxes himself has two names, and sometimes he's referred to in certain manuscripts as King Ahasuerus. 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 King Ahasuerus. And in other translations, he's translated as King Xerxes, which is Xerxes. So either name, same person. Same with Esther. Remember, her name was Hadassah in the Jewish culture, and then she went by Esther. So nobody really knows yet that she's a Jew. So we were at the point where Esther was sent to the king to sleep with him, and she is in verse 17. We're talking about the king's reaction to Esther. Esther 2, verse 17. And let me make sure I have the right translation. Okay, this is going to be the New International Version. It's a little easier to understand, I think. So, verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. Kind of cool that he liked her so much more than all the other virgins. And so he lifted her up and made her the queen when there were so many other people to choose from. You know, this is the thing, is that we sometimes think we have to do it for ourselves. But Psalm 40 verse 2 says this: He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and he set my feet upon a rock, making my footsteps firm. So God will lift us up if we rely on him. And that is a great, great principle, that the more we try to do on our own, the less successful we usually are. But when we let go and ask God to take care of us, that's when we're raised up. And then he gets the glory. He's the one who brings us up out of troubles. And then we don't have to do it ourselves, and we don't get the glory. He gets the glory. So Luke 1:52 is the same kind of concept. It says, he has brought down rulers from their thrones and has exalted those who were humble. So when we're humble and we rely on God, he'll do the lifting up. And that's what Esther did. She relied on God because she knew that there was not much she could do about it. She was a captive, a Babylonian captive, a Jew, and if she revealed that, she might be in big trouble. So she was just relying on God, and also on Mordecai, who was her father, really, even though he wasn't her father, her biological father. So anyway, he made her queen. King Xerxes made Esther queen and gave her a royal crown and so on. Okay, now the virgins then were probably assembled a second time, a different place. And I don't know why that verse is there or what that means, but right after that, we're told in verse 20, Esther had kept secret her family background and her nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. So she's still respecting her father, really, in this regard. Maybe she doesn't like keeping a secret, but she is. And now Mordecai, we remember, used to pace around to get information about Esther. And the next verse says, during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, we don't know why he's sitting at the king's gate. I don't know whether Esther maybe found a little job for him. Maybe he was now going to be part of the king's, servants or something, why he's there. Or if he's just sitting at the gate to get news of her. We're not really told. But look at what a perfect place he's in, how God has allowed him to be in the right place at the right time. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles, and all this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. Some important things to know here. First of all, go back to not thinking things are coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that Mordecai's sitting at the gate when these two people are talking about assassinating the king, and he overhears this plot. And right away he tells Esther. So he must have had some way to communicate with her. We don't know whether he, yelled in through the gate, or maybe he had a message sent to her. We don't know. But he had a way of communicating with her. Maybe she was allowed to see him. It's possible. Anyway, he said to her, guess what I overheard? And she right away told the king. Next time the king called her over, she said, guess what? My father Mordecai heard this. And the king's reaction was to have those two guards put to death. Doesn't say anything at this point about what happened to Mordecai. Doesn't seem like the king necessarily gave him any credit or thanked him in any way, but the whole thing was written down in the history book. We call it the Annals of History. Again, just another string of information that seems unimportant, okay? But later on becomes crucially important. So, we know that Esther's now in position as a queen. Mordecai has done a nice thing for the king. He's saved his life, basically. And all that report was written down in the history of the king's reign. And there's a lot to be said here about God working behind the scenes. And I found a verse that is really interesting, Isaiah 45:15. Now, in certain versions, it's not translated the way that as God working behind the scenes. So let me look it up. It's Isaiah 45. Isaiah 45. And let's see what it says in the NIV, which is New International Version. So Isaiah 45, verse 15 says this. Truly, you are a God who has been hiding himself, the God and Savior of Israel. So here he's talking about God not always being up front, not always being right out a miracle that you could say is, everybody knows and sees and recognizes. Here he's talking about God kind of hiding behind the scenes a little bit. And what's interesting about the way this is translated is I went to the Message version, which is a more contemporary, paraphrased version of the Bible. And it's not always my first choice because it's not a literal translation of the Bible. It's not a word for word, okay? It's paraphrased. But it's interesting to give you some food for thought and to elaborate on something. And the way this verse is translated in the Message sounds like this. Clearly you are a God who works behind the scenes, O God of Israel, Savior God. The thing that we can take heart from is the fact that God doesn't change at all. The stories change, the way he reveals himself changes, but God himself is the same from the beginning till now. He has never changed his character. He is still the same God. And he always was a God that works behind the scenes. At times he has shown himself more in a more upfront way, particularly when Jesus was doing his ministry. The miracles that he did were there to validate Jesus' ministry. It was a more upfront, in your face, obvious kind of thing. But for much of the time, our God works behind the scenes. And what we need to be looking for now, in this time, is God sightings. Looking for, where is God working? Where do I see his hand? Where do I see that it's not a coincidence? How has he protected me? How has he kept me safe? How can I glorify his name? So Esther herself does not say anything about God. And as we told before, God is not mentioned in this story. God is hidden. God is behind the scenes. And glory will come to God despite the fact that he doesn't do any outright miracles. Watch for the strings and the little things all coming together that will form a beautiful tapestry of God's work. Have a great day. Hope to see you soon.